Today we mourn the loss of a dear friend, and that is GameMaker Studio 2. If you haven't heard the news, let me break it to you. Yesterday I got an email that said that they are making changes to GameMaker. They adjusted their end user license agreement because they made changes to their pricing structure. And this is all supposed to be in the vein of it makes GameMaker more affordable. And that's all well and dandy, but there are some problems with this that we are going to talk about. So what it says here is, how does this affect your license? If you have the free version, you can continue to use it, and in fact, they have actually removed all of the restrictions in the free version. The only thing is, you have to pay to export your game, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the pricing options. If you had a trial license, which basically meant you could use the free version or not the free version, but you could use the full version of GameMaker Studio for free for 30 days. And then at the end of that 30 days, you either had to pay up or switch to the free version. And the free version used to have limits. It used to be you could only make like 25 objects, you could have like 5 sound effects, 3 rooms. It was like some bullshit like that. You only had a few options. And then, so they've gotten rid of the 30-day free trial version, and you can just use the free edition. And then they kind of summarized their big changes as that. They've adjusted their pricing to try and make it more affordable. They've bundled a few of the different export options into one subscription. So there are 2 subscriptions now. There's basically the publish to everything except console version, and then there's the also be able to publish to consoles. And we'll see that in a second here. They removed the free trial, they removed the 30-day trial, like I said, and it's just the free version or the subscription version, and they reduced the pricing for being able to export to consoles, which is actually a good thing. That's actually really cool. However, what they fail to mention here is that they have completely removed the option to buy a permanent license for GameMaker Studio. That is no longer an option, and that is the biggest change by far, and that is what has many people like me upset about this announcement. At least if the subreddit would have you believe that. So, this is the other part of the email. Why have we done it? We aim to bring game development to everyone. And they believe that the new pricing structure will make GameMaker more affordable and flexible for all users, and blah, 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 blah. And that FAQ that they talk about in that last sentence there, I will put a link in the video description. But the only thing that's really important for us is this next bit. And they also said that if you have a permanent license, that it is still valid. You will still have a permanent version of GameMaker Studio. That license is still valid because you paid for a permanent license. You just can't buy any more permanent licenses. So this was the first thing, like the very first thing in the FAQ, and I skimmed it. This is really the only other important thing. Why are you changing to a subscription model? We believe that our new subscription model gives all users an affordable option to meet their specific needs and helps gaming making, which is an awful term, just call it game making. They believe it'll make it more flexible and affordable for everybody. The main change is in the export options. You can develop your game for free, and then you have to pay to export it. And depending on how much you pay is how you can export it. So let's take a look at what those options are. GameMaker Studio 2. These are your options. You have the free version, which is you can just develop and you can play test your game in the editor. You can pay $10 a month and I'll show you the yearly pricing in a second. You can pay $10 a month to do desktop, web, mobile, Universal Windows platform, or you can pay $80 a month to also get console exports. There's an asterisk there because I'm sure there's some bullshit attached to it. And then the yearly pricing is $100 for the indie and $800 for the enterprise. But that's the big change, is that you now have to pay to actually publish your game, when this used to not be the case. Now, there is one little bit of silver lining. While they are making this change, because this literally happened yesterday, while they are making this change, the permanent license, this is the only way that you can still get a permanent license for GameMaker Studio 2. So if you want one and you can afford it, this is your only chance, is to buy GameMaker Studio 2 on Steam. This is a screenshot I took from today, as of like maybe an hour ago. So this is still up as of today. Who knows how long this will be up? And then you can buy it as a big bundle, or you could buy it as individual pieces. Just buy the bundle so that you're not paying $500. You're paying $263. Well, really, you don't need that one. We don't talk about that one. So it saves like a little bit of money if you buy it as a bundle. But this is the only way to get a permanent license, and then you can link your Steam account to your YoYoGames account, and then be able to blah, 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 blah. So this is the only way to still get a permanent license, and this is not going to last forever. You do not have very long to do this. Which is why I'm kind of rushing with this, and I've put all of this into a PowerPoint so I can just kind of click through it. Because who has time to do editing when this is like if you want this, you need to do this now. So, this upsets me greatly because I've been using GameMaker for a very long time. This is actually what got me into game development and programming and just really liking computers and like making shit on computers. If it wasn't for GameMaker, I would not have gone to college for computer science. And I'll spend a few minutes here to just briefly show you my journey. I started with this, the GameMaker's Apprentice book. This was originally my brother's. He made like one game out of it, and then I took it and made everything in it. And I love it. This book, I had so much fun with this book. And then later, my grandmother got me the sequel, and both of these books used GameMaker versions 7 and 8 respectively. And then a little bit after GameMaker's Companion, we started to get the beta for GameMaker Studio, and that's what Studio used to look like. So it was GameMaker 7, GameMaker 8, 8.1, Studio, and then when we finally got the full release of Studio, it looked like that. And then this is what the interface looked like for all of these. So this was what GameMaker 7 looked like, and GameMaker 8 also looked like this, but it just had a different logo. And around this time, around the 7.8 Studio 1, we also had the website looking like this, and it was kind of like this itch.io thing. And this was the first time that I ever published anything. It was like I made a few little games in GameMaker 7 and 8, and I put them on sandbox.yoyogames.com. And it looked more like this one, but it was like you could make your games, publish them, and it was all done on here. But unfortunately, good things have to come to an end, and it eventually died. I want to say around the time that they introduced Studio 2 is when they introduced their new... I don't know exactly what to call it because I've never used it, but it's like a... The best way I can describe it is like playing games on Roblox, like how you have a bunch of different games within Roblox, and then you just like go to the game's page, and then it'll open the player and play the game that way. That's how they do this now. It's kind of like that, unless they've changed it since I last looked at it. But I took one look at that, and I was furious because everything that I had ever uploaded was gone, and at least to me it seemed like it came out of nowhere. But that was 5 years ago now, and we've just kind of had to live with it ever since then. But this is GameMaker Studio 1, or as it is known now, it's 1.4. This was the last version of it before Studio 2 came out. Then they did some small updates, and then this is the final release of Studio 1.4, which is 1.4.99999. That just means that it's the final one. And one thing that you'll notice with all of these, so let's go back a few here. If you look at this, GameMaker 7 and GameMaker 8, they all have the hierarchy over here on the left, and then little windows pop up for individual things. So like this is the game window. This is like an actual playtest window. This is how you edit object properties. You like click on the little events, you see the actions or like the code blocks in there. This is like the room editor and stuff like that. But it was like this window-based system, and you can also see that here. It still keeps the traditional design of GameMaker. Like this, you can clearly tell that this is just the newest version of GameMaker. And that's not how Studio 2 looks. Studio 2 looks like this. And I'm just not really a fan of it. I don't really like this. It's fine, I guess. But, like, I don't understand why we need this flowchart of windows when these other windows, you could move them around, you could minimize them, you could full screen them, you could do whatever you wanted to because these were just regular windows on your operating system. And it was never... I never found it confusing. And maybe that's just because I've spent so much time in GameMaker 7 and 8 and 8.1 that this workflow just worked for me because I had been using it for a few years at that point. But this was great. This was very simple to follow. And I don't know, it just worked for me. And this... I just don't like it. I don't like it. And that's all I can really say about that is they had a very big design change when they went to Studio 2. I took one look at it, I went, ugh. And then I stuck with Studio 1.4. I got a permanent license for it. I got my own permanent license for it, I should say. One day when it went on sale, it was kind of an impulse buy because I knew I needed to grab it. And then, lo and behold, they stopped selling Studio 1.4 licenses because they retired Studio 1.4. I still have it though. I still prototype in it to this day because it is so fast to prototype. And this is where I'm going to talk about why I think they did this change. So Studio 2, it's still GameMaker. It's still GameMaker Studio. There's some small changes in like GML and how you do depth of objects that won't make sense unless you've used GameMaker. and in particular older versions of GameMaker. But I digress. There are some small differences, but it's still GameMaker, and that's the point. But as some people have pointed out on the subreddit, there are a few good reasons as to why they've done this. And this is my interpretation of what those people have said, so just bear with me. The first thing is that when you think about game engines for indie development, or even professional development, what do you think of? You don't think of GameMaker. I can guarantee that. Unless you are crazy like me, and you grew up with GameMaker, and you're like, GameMaker is actually a decent engine. Like, you can do some good work in it. Look at Hyper Light Drifter. Look at Nuclear Throne. Look at the original Risk of Rain. These are all GameMaker games that are very playable. They're very well designed. They're very well made. So it's, you can do good work in GameMaker. That was never the question. But you don't think of it as a game development engine. It almost seems kind of kiddie because it has the drag and drop thing. Like, that's one of the big things that makes GameMaker so accessible, is that it has drag and drop programming, if you will. And that's kind of like the blueprints in Unreal, or there's another engine that has code blocks, or something like that. But the drag and drop that GameMaker has makes it very accessible for people just starting out in programming or game development, because you don't need to know how to program to make a game in GameMaker. You don't need to know anything about coding to make a game in GameMaker, and that's kind of the beauty of it, or at least one of the aspects of GameMaker's beauty. And then if you really want to fine-tune your game and like get more out of the engine, that's when you learn GML. That's when you learn how to program. And that was how my journey went. Was like, I started with the drag and drop, and eventually I was like, I need to be able to do more. And then I started to notice how the functions and the syntax of GML directly corresponded with the drag and drop in GameMaker. And I started converting everything from drag and drop to code. And it made learning how to program so much easier. And by the time I started doing it in college for my computer science degree, I already knew how to do functions and variables and loops and stuff, because I had been doing this stuff in GameMaker in some made-up scripting language, not even in a real programming language. But all the concepts made sense because I learned them in GameMaker. But while that's all fine and dandy, and it's actually pretty amazing, you don't think of GameMaker as a game development engine. Because what are the big engines? Unreal and Unity. And then you've got like the in-house engines that other people make. The most famous examples of these being id Tech. I know other people use id Tech, but it's basically for id Software. Let's be real. And Bethesda. Like other Bethesda subsidiaries will use id Tech, like Machine Games, for example. But there's id Tech. There's I'm gonna forget the name of it. Crytek. There's Crytek. There's Frostbite. But those engines are not super accessible for, indie developers. If you're an indie developer, you're either using Unreal or Unity. And that's just kind of how it is. You might know about GameMaker, But how many people still use GameMaker for that purpose? Because if you were interested in making 3D games, you probably picked up Unity. Because Unreal being free to use is a pretty recent thing. And Unity was always like the 3D engine. And then it also just happened to have 2D capabilities, which are actually pretty good. So, GameMaker used to be more prevalent, but it's kind of fallen to the wayside because now Unreal is free. So now there's this like competition between Unreal and Unity, these two gigantic communities behind these engines. They have just kind of pushed GameMaker to the side. And because of that, I think it's very reasonable to say that GameMaker has been hemorrhaging users. And the people that still use GameMaker... Oh, another big game, well-known game that uses GameMaker, Hotline Miami. But that's the thing, it's like, success stories like Hyper Light Drifter, Hotline Miami, Risk of Rain, games like these are the exception with GameMaker. You really don't hear about people making super big games in GameMaker. They're very simple games. Like Hotline Miami, at its core, is a very simple game. Risk of Rain, at its core, is a very simple game. Hyper Light Drifter is very simple, but it has so much in terms of assets and like traversing the world that's what makes that game complex. And Nuclear Throne is as simple as it gets. If you don't know about Nuclear Throne, that game started as a 7-day game jam entry, and I think it won the competition that it was in, and then they went on to develop it further, give it some music and stuff, and then they turned it into a full game. And Nuclear Throne is fantastic. It's phenomenal, and I love one of the developers for that game made an article about how they generate their levels, and it's been one of my favorite ways to generate levels in GameMaker, period, because it's just so useful. It's using a walker generator. That's a topic for another day. But the point is, this is the exception. It's not the rule. And even though GameMaker showcases various games made in GameMaker on their website, it doesn't cover all of them because not everybody is proudly saying, hey, I made this game in GameMaker. So I think it's very safe to say that GameMaker is hemorrhaging users, and because of that, they're making less and less money, and the people that, are super die-hard GameMaker people, like myself, we've bought permanent licenses or we've moved on because we grew up with GameMaker and we're either doing something else now or we're using our old versions of GameMaker. That's me. It really just... things are just different now. The game development landscape has changed so much since GameMaker was at its prime. And while the engine is more powerful than it's ever been, just simply because this is the newest one, this has the most features, the most refinement behind it, just because it has all that doesn't mean that it's popular. Doesn't mean that it's even well known at this point. Like, people, I'm sure you could say the name GameMaker, and even my college professor for game development, I mentioned this engine, and he was like, yeah, if you're serious about game development, don't use that. That's the attitude that people have about GameMaker. They don't think it's capable of serious games. And that's just the thing, is people making serious games, or like big projects, they're probably not using GameMaker. And that's just the unfortunate reality that we live in. So they're hemorrhaging users because it's not popular, and compared to other engines, I don't think GameMaker can handle big projects as well. Maybe things have changed with Studio 2, but Studio 1, GameMaker 8, GameMaker 7, if you tried to make a big project, good fucking luck. Like, for better or worse, this past year, I spent 2-3 months on a pretty decent project in Studio 1.4, and I can still make sense of it just because I took a lot of care in organizing the project, but that's not even a big game. It's like a survival game that's timer-based, kind of like Risk of Rain. But even then, just the amount of resources in it has made it very daunting to look at if I've been away from it for a little while. And that's not even a game that's even close to being released. And I know that's just kind of part of the nature of releasing games, but I've worked on a professional game, and that was way easier to manage than this tiny little prototype that I've been working on for a few months. And that professional game was made in Unity. Go figure. And that's for various reasons that we chose Unity, or that we were going to use Unity anyways. But it was so much easier to use Unity for that purpose. It played with Git nicely. It plays well with other code editors like Visual Code, or Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio, or Sublime, or whatever you're using. It works with all of that stuff, and you can even just link it directly in Unity, so that if you want to edit a script, you double click it in Unity and it opens that editor for you. And I know you can do that to some extent in Studio, but again, it's just like, who really cares at this point? I want to care, but it's kind of hard to when the last version of GameMaker that I really liked is almost 10 years old now, and now they've done something that I really personally don't agree with. I think subscription models are evil, but a necessary evil, just because you'll end up in this problem where since GameMaker has been hemorrhaging users, as I've said a few times now, they are making less and less money from permanent license sales. And they've tried to supplement that with subscription models already. Like, the subscription models are not new for GameMaker Studio 2. They introduced it with Studio 2, I believe. The standard edition used to be $40 a month, something like that, or like $40 a year. It was something crazy. And then, like, hidden away was like, or you could buy a permanent license for $100. But they hid it on purpose, so that and that was also why I didn't use Studio 2 for a long time, was because it had moved on from being a pay once and do whatever the fuck you want with it, and it moved to we are Netflix but for games, and you have to pay constantly to develop your game. And I just wasn't for that, and that I think that pushed a lot of people away. It certainly pushed me away. And I think the damage is done, unfortunately. While I understand why they've gone to this new model of pay to export, free to develop, I think in the long run this will hurt them more than it will help them. Just because GameMaker has already been losing popularity, at least in my eyes. And now, if they've pissed off the diehard GameMaker fans, the post on Reddit, everyone is just like, well, time to go switch to Godot. And that's what I'm in the process of doing right now. It's just sad. It's sad that this is what it's come to, and I wish things were different. And I think that's all I really have to say. I've rambled on and on for long enough. So on that note, rest in peace, GameMaker. You definitely changed my life. But all good things must, unfortunately, come to an end.